Hi, everyone. In this week's video, what I'd love to share with all of you is how to set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion council if your organization doesn't have one already. And particularly for organizations that may not have the resources to hire an outside consultant to come in. So I often get asked by prospective clients, what's the role of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and how do we put one together in our organization? So the way that I approach the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council is as my internal ambassadors to be able to start with a group that disseminates that work so that it becomes a shared responsibility within the organization. Because yes, although starting at the top with your senior leadership team and the buy-in from your senior leadership team is so important when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion work, the responsibility and accountability is shared among everyone within the organization. So how do we first create a group of individuals that will become the internal ambassadors to spread that work outward? So what I first talk about is, if there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan in place, then your diversity, equity, and inclusion council usually becomes the group or the team that shepherds that forward, that is looking to make sure that that work is being done and is pulling in the right individuals to get that work done. Now, what do I mean by a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan? What I mean by that is when we're looking at every single department within an organization and making sure that each of the policies, procedures, the way that we're approaching people, that each of those departments are looking at things from that lens. So what I usually typically recommend is that there's an individual from each department represented on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, because they'll be able to look at their department from that lens and bring in that perspective to the council. What I also typically recommend is that there be someone, if you don't have someone from the senior leadership team, that you have someone that at least has the ability to influence at the senior leadership level, because you want that buy-in, you want that connection with the senior leadership team, because again, all of these initiatives that the council will be working on are intended to move these efforts forward within the organization. So without buy-in from the senior leadership team, it may be very challenging to get some of these things into play. So when you have representation from different individuals across different departments, different perspectives being represented, then they are shepherding the plan forward. Now, the plan could be different key performance metrics for different initiatives that each of the departments are doing to move the needle in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So that's one aspect in which the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council can be responsible and accountable for. But the other perspective is how to empower these individuals to help move the corporate culture so that it is more inclusive, so that people feel like they can belong. And that can mean a variety of different initiatives, from facilitated conversations, listening circles, activities to bring people together, lunch and learn. So that can take a variety of different forms. But again, when you have your internal folks running those initiatives rather than always being a consultant, you have more buy-in. And again, that just distribution of accountability and responsibility on these topics, and as a way of bringing people together. So that's one tidbit, if you will, on how you can get started with your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council and some of the things that they can be doing to get this off the ground. And once they also get going, you're going to start identifying other opportunities based on what's coming up. In other words, are there certain issues that we didn't recognize from a culture perspective, or a dimension of diversity that we're still struggling with? It could be gender parity. It could be making space for whatever dimension of diversity that's not being embraced or celebrated. And how do we create that space within our organization? So hopefully that's helpful for those organizations that haven't had the opportunity to implement or get started with their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council.